Being communicative. Something goes wrong, you need to say, something's gone wrong. Can't shy away from the problems. And I think that you want to act like a partner with the contractor, with the owner. In those early years, I remember looking around with the plumber. And these are things that you don't do that these days, but we had a team up there and we all knew each other. 15 years ago when I took over, you have these junior people in the office and they're doing amazing things. So we elevated them, gave them license to think creatively about the firm doing things in a different or better way.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Rens Hayes, founding partner of H&O Lifelong Learner, and I am personally obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, thanks so much for joining us. And if you're a returning listener, can't thank you enough. Let's go. Today's guest is Nancy Ludwig. She is the president and senior principal of Icon Architecture. They're a Boston architectural firm. They branded their primary sectors, Live, Renew, and Engage. We're going to hear all about that today. And I think they've added 2 more sectors that they're really focused on. An interesting thing about Nancy, she went through an ownership transition previously when she took over as a shareholder at Icon. And it was a difficult process, and it really changed her perspective on how things should go and how she was going to do it differently when it was her turn to hand over the reins or to let emerging leaders buy into the company. You're going to want to hear that. So if you know somebody in the architecture, real estate, engineering world that's going to benefit from hearing from a leader today, please share this episode with them because Nancy is a wealth of knowledge. And without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Nancy Ludwig. Please join me in welcoming Nancy. Nancy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Just delighted to be here.
Delighted to be here. That's what we like to hear. So I always like giving people context. So for those that don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Nancy, and what Icon is all about?
Sure. I'm an architect. I've been doing this for 45 years, believe it or not. And I've been president of Icon Architecture for the past 15 years, and actually a staff member of this firm for over 40. Icon is a firm that is located in downtown Boston. We're 50 people, we're woman-owned, and we do a mix of work running from multifamily that ranges from high-rise to low-rise, affordable to high-end luxury. And we also have an institutional and municipal practice, so we do a range of projects there from city halls to urban theaters to collegiate facilities and many others. I would say the practice that I joined 40 years ago was one that had its heart and soul in the world of urban design and planning, and really got its reputation from doing heritage planning, working in a lot of the older cities and towns around New England and the Northeast, and planning for reuse of historic resources to stimulate economic development. So that has always been a rich history that we've built
Really cool.
upon.
So you were going in and working with towns in the greater Boston area, New England area, and helping them think of their master plan for like a downtown area?
Further afield, doing heritage planning for the New York Urban Cultural Parks Plan, doing heritage planning for the historic resources up in Lowell. And I was really brought on as the 5th employee back in 1981 to do architecture, and wound up working on some affordable housing developments that really set the way for how we think about affordable housing still to this day. And I was lucky enough to get involved in a big mixed-use project up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where we built a new mixed-use hotel, condominiums, retail spaces on an urban site in that downtown. So I think I earned my chops working in historic districts, whether restoring historic buildings or monuments or building anew in a historic urban setting.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And it's interesting to hear that affordable housing was a topic of conversation in the 80s as well. How has that world changed from the 80s to today? Has it
So I'm
just
going to write a
increased in
book about
demand?
that. I'm going
You're
to
gonna,
write a book about that when I retire.
that's perfect. I'll be a reader.
Um, I joined this firm because one of my former partners, Dennis Frenchman, who's a tenured professor at MIT, was a graduate of the University of Cincinnati, where I graduated from. And through the grapevine out here, I found out about him. They had recently had the West Broadway redevelopment published in Progressive Architecture, which was the big magazine of the time, and they had gotten an award for thinking about this complex of buildings, like 350 units that had been built in the 1950s. And, you've seen them, they're ubiquitous structures all over the country, 3-story walk-ups, bunker-like housing, low ceilings, everybody shares a common stairwell. And all these kind of standard federal or state-built affordable, actually public housing is what we referred to it as the time. These were all the same, what they were, and they didn't work very well for families. And as, the years have gone on, they work less well for contemporary living. So what the predecessor firm, Blaine Frenchman and Associates, had been able to do was think about this housing type in a different way. And in South Boston here, create a new plan, striking some new city streets through the development, reconnecting it to the neighborhood around it, and thinking about how you recreate housing here, trying to envision some breakthrough townhouse or duplex units for families so that they could come in off a sidewalk directly into their home, so that they could have a private yard space, so that you began to define a sense of home for each family here. Ultimately, the firm was also doing a federal study for public and Indian housing across the nation at that time. And ultimately, all this work led towards a federal housing program called Hope 6, where we were lucky to be in a region that received a lot of the Hope 6 funding. And we came into these, what were monolithic superblock developments, and were able to, in phases, tear down those structures that really did not serve contemporary living and work with cities to extend new streets into these developments, reconnect them to their neighborhoods, and build new housing in the form of townhouses, mid-rise buildings, or even high-rise buildings, where we could really design a townhouse family unit for larger families. And of course, then in the mid-rise buildings, we were really perfecting a single-bedroom unit type that served well the senior population in that development. So creating the right kind of housing for the right kind of user. And that work still goes on today. We're just finishing up the rebuilding of the Orient Heights development lawn in East Boston. And, we have the opportunity to work across a dozen of these kinds of projects and create thousands of housing units where, people are really so much better able to build their lives. So
yeah, that's such an important piece.
It's a really important, we kind of say there's a bit of a mission, we're a bit mission driven.
It's the best way to be.
Yeah. So anyway, that work, as you may know, Boston hadn't built much in the early 1980s. And
it seems really, like, if I understand correctly, that Hope 9 program, if I said that right, Hope
6.
you were actually tearing down the previous public housing or affordable housing because it was so poorly designed for its actual use that they had to start back over, knock it down, and rebuild.
Correct. And it wasn't cost effective to start doing breakthroughs and trying to create large family units. And so the federal government acknowledged that and started to fund those kinds of projects. And now, of course, we're very much involved in public-private partnerships to get housing built, particularly affordable housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're coming onto sites and we're increasing density so that you replace the unit count for the affordable, and then you add a market rate component, a significant market rate component that really helps to support the affordable share of units. And those are
Is there
those
a
are
perfect
projects.
balance there? Or
Well,
is there a threshold or a range they're typically looking for? Like what makes those, especially, I'm not familiar with how this private public
yeah.
partnership works,
Well,
but
I mean, the ideal is 2 to 1.
mhm,
For every affordable unit, you build 2 market rate units.
mhm.
It's so hard to finance these deals, so hard, and getting increasingly difficult to do that. So, we also see ourselves being pushed to create new new prototypes, right? We're currently in Somerville replacing 216 units with, I'm not even going to remember, 430 units.
Wow.
And the first phase of that has just gotten under construction, and we are using a modular steel and concrete modular system to build a 10-story building that will have 168 units of affordable housing. And
Really
um,
exciting.
yeah, and it'll be interesting, that's for sure. It's
Hmm.
a modular system out of the Netherlands. It's paired with a New York equity firm, and they've set up shop here. And
They're
we're
expanding in Massachusetts, correct? That
well, they have a
modular company?
plant here now. They're renting a plant to start production. So ours will be the first project that they're producing, and
Very
we'll
exciting.
we'll hope that they can do more, right?
In the modular, do you see the modular world as, will that play a major factor in solving the housing crisis and affordable housing? Is this industry just going to continue to take over traditional construction methods?
So been around a long time. And, back in the 1980s, this was the same snipe hunt. We have to find a way to do this more cost effectively.
Yep.
And we, through the 80s and 90s, we were trying to do modular work. We, about 3 years ago, completed a fairly significant modular project in the city of Boston. Those were wood boxes that came out of Canada. The project's called The Graphic, and it's actually in Charlestown, which is in my neighborhood.
Love Charlestown.
I do too.
Never lived there, but I've always admired the neighborhood.
It's a great neighborhood. So, again, the thing about modular is you're probably not saving in construction cost, but you're saving time, right? And time is money. So if you can off-site manufacture something, hopefully in a more contained environment, meaning that everything you're building in some kind of warehouse or factory that has a roof over it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're avoiding rain and snow and moisture as you're building. And then you can, bring hopefully what was built in a more controlled environment to a site and stack it up. Right. Hopefully you're getting a better quality construction. You're certainly getting a better quality unit and acoustic separation, because box upon box is like having, a double floor system. So there's a lot of benefits, but there's a lot of issues surrounding it as well.
Yeah,
You know,
the industry as a whole is continuing to grow and find their standards, because right now it's almost like the Wild West, right? Like every modular company works a little bit differently. There's not standards in the industry, so it's very much relationship based. But it
yeah,
is interesting, like you mentioned, this building's 9 or 10 stories and uses a steel modular unit. And we
yes,
actually interviewed on design development the Roger Krulak, who's the CEO of Full Stack Modular, and they specialize in high rise, large scale modular construction. And as the building goes up, it gets more and more efficient because you're repeating the units over time. So
right.
for all that management and prep, the manufacturing time, and they had a building going right now, they could manufacture 120,000 square feet of modular units in 4 months, complete, finished interiors and all that. So it's pretty amazing to see what's possible out there. And then I'm sure the next challenge is still achieving architectural intent while trying to conform to the box, right?
Absolutely.
Not easy.
How do you simplify the box enough, which includes, you know, if you're taking this box and it has to turn different directions on the site, how do you put windows in it? You know, so the windows work whatever orientation you have. How do you make efficient structures out of modular, right? Because the most efficient box width is 13'8". And yet if you build that into every box for a bedroom width and a living room width, you're winding up creating some units that are quite large by today's standards. I mean, fine for the market rate environment, like the graphic, not so great for the affordable housing industry. So how do you structure it so you've got different width boxes that accommodate some of the square footages that are recommended by the housing agencies here in New England? It's a constant, you know,
It's a balance.
it's a balance.
It's a
It's
yin- it's a push and a pull.
yeah,
Before we go, I want to learn more about why architecture for you. But before that, I wanted to point out another thing you mentioned with affordable housing and the families. As someone who has a growing family, I have 2 kids now, 3 and 5. I couldn't even think about like lugging all of the stuff up to a fourth story unit. Like I used to live in Boston, thinking about carrying a stroller and your kids and all the stuff that comes with them. I feel like you're constantly walking out with 5 bags trying to go
yeah,
somewhere, even though you're going to like lunch.
yeah.
So I completely empathize with the people that need access to like ground floor units and some space for their family to actually congregate, right?
Yeah, typically we wouldn't recommend putting like larger family units in a high rise. Or where we've taken them in a mid-rise, we've put them on the ground floor so that they have private front door, back door, and then stacked ones and some twos above.
Very nice. Early career. So, or I guess let's go before your career. Who were some key influences or experiences in your early life that really impacted you?
Well, I would say, so I went to the University of Cincinnati. It's funny, I'm heading out there next week to give a house.
Very nice.
It'll be kind of fun. And as part of that program, you do co-ops. So at the time I was doing the program, it was a 6-year program. And after your first year and a half, you co-opt, right? Meaning that the year was based on 4 3-month quarters, and 2 of the quarters you went to work and 2 of the quarters you were in school.
Oh, wow.
Typically, you alternated them, but at times you could pair up a couple of quarters, you know. And so I would say that I was very much influenced by those firms that I worked for at that time. I worked for a small firm in Baltimore that was doing a lot of housing, a lot of interesting work, 2 really gregarious principals who were willing to sit with me, help me learn, allowed me, you know, to work in the evenings on other projects. I mean, right, that's really the only way you learn this stuff, right, is to just do it, draw it, think about it. my funny story is I also came out to New England and wound up co-oping for a small firm in Newburyport, John Woodman and Associates. And again, it was a small firm. I got my hands on everything, really enjoyed that, learned so much from John. And when I got out of college, it was the recession of the early 80s. I had taken a job with a firm, an award-winning firm in Indianapolis. And about 2 weeks before I was about to graduate, they sent me, and by the way, it was a letter because there was no internet, right? And the letter said, we're really, really sorry, but we've run out of work. We can't honor our commitment to you. And so there I was stuck. And strangely enough, as part of graduation activities, I bumped into a principal at SOM in New York who offered me a position there. Very gracious guy. I went to New York, gave myself about 2 weeks to find a place to live. And it hit me hard. I was going to be making, $17,000 a year, and I was going to be spending $1,000 a month on housing, living. Right?
Money doesn't quite add up there.
Did not come from a wealthy family. And, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, okay, great, I'll be in New York, but I won't be enjoying New York. And I wound up going in the day I was supposed to start. I said to this man who was very gracious to have hired, I'm sorry, but it's better that I acknowledge this now. I don't think this is a good fit. I took the Greyhound bus to Boston where I had friends because I, worked down here in a co-op. And I called John Woodman and I said, hey, John, I've probably just done the stupidest thing in my life, but I quit this position I had at SOM. Can I come do anything for you? I need to earn some money. And he said, this is just fantastic news. He said, I just bought a house for my parents and I need to do a major addition for it. I want you to come up here and you can be my parents' architect. And, summertime.
So
and you
funny.
can live in the house. It won't have electricity, but I can turn on, I think I had water. I had
Yep.
running water, right? No heat, no electricity, anything. And
Oh my God, what a story. So that's the kickoff. You lived on the job site.
and of course, John knew exactly what he wanted to do for the addition, but he always called me the architect for Bertha and Louis' house. And they loved me all their years. And anyway, so
Very cool.
that was a great summer. Again, a lot of great experience, and somebody saved me.
That's too funny.
And then through networking there, I met Dennis Frenchman, and I wound up coming over to Lane French. Actually, no, I had a little stint somewhere else for a couple of months, but wound up in this place, which has
Very
really
cool.
been my home for 40 years.
But let's go to your early career. You mentioned you spent about 25 years at the company before you took over as a shareholder and became president of the firm.
I think I've been a shareholder for 20 or 22 years. So,
Okay. So you
But I-
became
I-
president after
Yeah,
you were a shareholder
correct.
for a number of years before you became president.
Correct. Yeah.
Could you
And
talk to us
that's it.
about your kind of the vision you had for your career? Did you always want to be an owner and a shareholder?
Never
Was
thought about
one
it.
foot in front of the other? How did that opportunity happen?
Never thought about it.
Never
I
thought
truly
about it.
didn't. And I would say years later, I am so grateful that I've owned a business, and I'm really proud of this business. And
You
what
should be. It's a
we've done
great
with
business.
it. And I think that when you're designing buildings, everything you do is very subjective, right? And everybody's critiquing it, and everybody's telling you, oh, I would have done something different, or, I've been in community meetings where people are, and that is so hungry, right?
Yeah,
And
the neighborhood associations aren't always welcoming.
Right.
Yep.
Constantly being judged by everybody around you, and everybody thinks they know design. So, I've definitely thrived There's a way you have a conversation with a community, there's a way you build consensus, and that's all great. But when you're running a business, it's truly either the numbers are right or the numbers are trending wrong, you know?
Yep.
So my father and my brothers were CPAs and actuaries, and so something in me just, loves the numbers, and a
Yeah.
business isn't all the numbers, right? A business is how you innovate and how you bring everyone along, and that's all been really fun too.
Yes. And so thinking about your time growing your career, climbing the ladder at the company, and getting to the opportunity that made you a shareholder. What started to separate you? Where did you excel as an architect in your day-to-day and leading projects? How did you go from that to be getting the opportunity to be a shareholder?
I was really lucky, right? I think I was really lucky. I was the fifth employee of the predecessor firm to this one. And we were doing some pretty incredible projects. And neither of my former partners were architects, really. So I came in with a little bit of experience, but some good experience. And they had brought on another principal, and he brought in the big project up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the mixed-use hotel and conference center. And I don't know, stubbornness, perseverance. I kept drawing this plan and saying, here's the plan. We need to move forward. It makes sense. It works in the urban environment. And I remember that principal drawing sort of a big box that didn't feel right there. And ultimately the client said, I like that design. I really like that. And I want to go with that. And that client was, a wonderful, generous being. And we just kind of started rolling with it. And he gave me a lot of opportunity. So,
and this was really around that project in Portsmouth, that large scale project.
So in the 80s, when I was really starting out, that project was completed in 1988. And I'm telling you, I took it from the first napkin sketch through the construction documents and all the way into construction. Those were sort of different times, honestly, when we were still drawing by hand, and there were computers for sure, but the amount of RFIs and change,
they didn't exist. It was too hard to submit them.
It was a Midwestern contractor with some great people involved, and it was just an eye-opening, just learning in overdrive for the first.
Yes, that's what a large-scale project will do to anyone in architecture and engineering or construction. There's so much thrown at you in such a short amount of time. The experience you can get from a large-scale project in just a short 2 to 3 years, some people don't experience in an entire career.
Right.
And really be something.
Really have to, be wanting and willing to go into all in, right? And at the same time, I've been living in Charlestown all this time too, and it was not the ideal community to live at that time.
At the time.
And so I'll never forget one day. So I'm renting this apartment. It's a 4th floor walk up that had been built for Navy housing or something, and some guy bought the mansion up on the monument, and this building kind of came as part of the package deal, this 8-unit building. And he gave me this ridiculous price to buy this unit I was living in. And I'm like, I remember negotiating with him and talking him down until, $55,000. This is a long time ago. But I bought this unit. And I remember at the time I qualified for a low interest loan through the state of Massachusetts. And I started tearing it apart and rebuilding it. And I was lucky enough that one of my schoolmates moved to Charlestown He now works for Skanska. He's still in the area. And he came from a family, his father was a contractor. And so he'd come over and he'd say, well, we have to do this, that, and the other thing. Anyway, totally renovated it. These hands and the hands of friends. And I think that's a really significant experience too. I think you got to touch and feel construction because I think it helps you understand certainly how things go together, how you have to sequence things, how you have to move a project along. So I think those two things happening in that, first 7 to 8 years of my career really moved me along. And I'll tell you, once you get through a project, like a big use project like that, you learn so much and you move on. And, at the same time, there were a lot of other projects going in too.
Yes.
But I think that one was really the significant one. And then, I don't know, I sort of became I remember we hired more senior architects who came on board. One of them was a British guy who's still a dear friend to this day.
Yep.
He was one of my partners, retired a few years ago. And, he too was just so willing to take the time to explain things and to back me up, to kerfuffle with the contractors. That is the time when people used to yell and scream and swear.
That was just communicating. That's how you made relationships back then, right?
Yeah.
The takeaways I have here, one, obviously the ability to get on a large scale project because you just see a lot. Two,
and have
hands-on
responsibility. And have responsibility, not just be doing somebody's red lines, but really be thinking about.
I got exposed early in my career to really the construction administration of the Liberty Mutual office tower here in Boston, which is an extremely complicated job, and the relationships and the pressure of the schedule and everything.
Yeah.
And I would attest a lot of my learning to that experience. And you're kind of learning as you go, but you can still be accountable and responsible, even if you don't have the answer on the spot. And a message and advice I often give is, we're not paid to have the answer the moment somebody asks a question. So you don't have to try to make something up to act like you have. You have to ask questions to make sure you know what people need, and you tell them when you're going to get back to them. Okay, I understand you need X, Y, and Z. I'll get back to you by the end of the day. I'll get back to you by noon tomorrow. And as long as you're accountable for being resourceful and finding the answer, no one's ever going to worry about you because you always find a way to get it done.
Right. A lot of it is being organized and responding in a timely way, right?
Yes.
And being communicative. Something goes wrong, and you need to say, something's gone wrong, and we need to talk about it, right?
Yep.
You can't shy away from the problems, and I think that you want to act like a partner.
Face them head on.
With the contractor, with the owner, in those early years, I remember, walking around with the plumber. These are things that you don't do that these days, but we had a team up there. We all knew each other.
Hey everyone, quick break from the episode. If you're enjoying today's episode, please send this to a friend, like, share, comment, subscribe. It's the only way we're going to help more people. Let's get back to the show. That's really great. And the hands-on experience, I can also attest to that. Like trying to find a way at some point in your career, whether it's before you're a practicing architecture and engineer, or if you're doing your own home reno, like getting your hands into construction is so valuable. For me, I grew up in the steel industry, and even structural steel, miss iron. So I've fabricated, welded, installed buildings, built stairs and rails. And the amount of confidence or perspective that gave me as I entered even just studying in college or entering the work world, I always had some value to provide because not everybody had that experience. And it became something that I was able to learn faster as I saw things go together. So I have two of those exact same piece of advice, and they've certainly helped me. Ownership transition. Last time we spoke, we talked about it. It's a big learning experience. There's nothing simple about it. Could you share, and I know in a gracious way, Nancy, some of the lessons or perspectives that you gained from your first ownership transition as you became a shareholder and then president of Icon?
Sure. So I think I told you I'm generation 2.
Mm-hmm.
So my former partners started this company, and I joined them about a year later. And about 15 years later, I was given the opportunity. At that point, I certainly had been helping build the housing practice, and I was given the opportunity to buy in. The firm expanded. We were a lot of people, and we were on 2 floors on Chauncey Street. And 2007 happened.
Mm-hmm. Fun time.
Fun time. Fun. And, there was a recession in the early 80s when I got out of school. There was a recession in the early 90s where we did a lot of work for the federal government, specifically for the National Park Service, that got us through that. And then it was a nice ride for a while, and all of a sudden, right, tech collapses, and here we are, and all of a sudden the bank is calling our loans and asking for personal guarantees, and my former partners were all, I'd say at that point, they kind of had their own practices. One of them was traveling internationally, doing a lot of heritage planning work in Egypt, and
You almost had their siloed businesses within the same firm, right?
Yeah, I remember the
It's
banker,
more common
and of
than
course,
I've realized.
I was in charge of the banking relationship at that point because they were all off doing something. And I remember one by one reaching out to them, one by one, and they were all probably in their, I don't know, early 60s maybe, and they were like, not very interested in signing a, personal guarantee. And so that just led to a series of conversations about what's the value of the firm, how do you want to exit, what is,
how do we evaluate the company?
And there were 3 of them who had different points of view. One of them are the former president basically went on a sabbatical for a few months and then came back and worked half time. One of them, Dennis, was already a tenured professor at MIT and had been spending little time at the firm. And I could go on and on, but they all had sort of other life plans. And so it was a pretty swift negotiation. What's funny is that leading up to this, I had hired somebody to come in and do evaluation in the firm. And that work
Fortunate timing.
Well, not really, because evaluation takes some time, and this banking relationship, as happened to many firms at this point in time, right, was like immediate. You have a couple of weeks to figure this out.
That was an immovable deadline.
Right. And so it caused these conversations to happen very quickly. The ownership of the firm shifted very quickly. All these negotiations were 5-year or whatever. And so ownership changed dramatically. And at that point, then I had another equal partner still left, one of that generation before me who wanted to stick around. And then a couple of minority interest partners. And so onward and upward. And I think it was at that juncture that the firm really, urban design and planning work was kind of not a focus for us anymore. Those were really hard projects to do. You had to give a lot, and the fees were very little. And this housing thing in 2007, 2008, the world of housing in Boston just exploded. And so I also feel like we were in the right place at the right time, and started doing a range of projects from Avenir and one town on the West End. Those were so all that work was happening in the early 2000s, right? So one of those projects was caught up in the 2008 crash too, when Lehman Brothers went under. And that went from being a condo project to being a rental project.
Mhm.
Again, a high rise built over the Central Artery Tunnel and all those West End sites. Now the West End was so different, but we did 2 high rise buildings down there. So anyway,
Really cool.
there was all this stuff going on, and
It's like a little chaos created the opportunity, and you seize the
Yep.
moment.
and I would say within several short years, we had really flipped the company around, and profitable.
Did you diversify in market sectors in that time? Is that when you started to, you obviously, and I love how your team branded. Could you talk to us about branding your different market sectors? Your live, your
Sure.
renew, your engage.
Right.
It's memorable.
Thank you. It's fun, right? So we call it, it's funny. In about the towards 2008, 2010. So, I was the architect, and I was honestly doing a lot of different kinds of projects. And we had this big collegiate project that we did, an old manufacturing plant that we turned into classrooms and a music school and everything for Salem State College.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibility of that work continuing on was very bright. There was a lot of work happening in the state college system and with other opportunities we were seeing. And for about 4 years, I was looking for somebody to come on board and really head up that practice. And all of a sudden on LinkedIn one day, and this is when LinkedIn was
That's early LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get this message from somebody I went to school, architecture school with, who was two years behind me. But we had met because we both worked up in Newburyport for John Woodman, and we were switching out the apartment one day. And
That's a small world, Newburyport in Cincinnati.
And so anyway, he had been working for a firm for a long time, a firm that had been affected quite a bit by this recession of 2007, 2008. So he was looking for new opportunities. And I'm like, God,
this is the time.
Come on in for a cup of coffee. And I think by the end of the cup of coffee, he was willing to come on over. And so Nate Collier has headed our institutional practice since then. And at that point, I had another partner, Janice Amaya, and Janice was tired of sort of, being under the housing bubble, which, I was known a lot for that work. And so she really wanted to brand kind of a different practice. And around that time, we were also seeing a lot of clients come to us with older buildings, facilities, whatever. A lot of elementary schools that were surplus, mill buildings, whatever. And so she branded the Renew. So we became Live, Learn, Renew. And now I always refer to it as the 3-legged stool. And they always says, no, it's like a big wheel. How's it?
Yes, they always had 3 spokes. That's too funny.
But
I like the big wheel.
It's great. And it does, the Renew sort of goes between institutional.
It can be either. There's a bridge there, but it's still.
Now we're kind of in the middle of rebranding, refreshing the brand, right? And so in the past 15 years, we've again been very lucky with this housing work that we have really done a lot of leading edge sustainable projects. Well, we're currently, most of our housing, at least all our affordable housing, and even some of our market housing is now being built to Passive House standards. And so we built this very robust practice in sustainability, and we see that as very key to the Renew work as well. So as our new generation...
It's a hot topic, sustainability.
Matt and I, as of like 3 hours ago, are sharing an office. So sitting right
So Matt's right here, Matt Murata.
It's just
love it. Hey, Matt.
Over as COO. This whole work from home thing, we sublet part of our space And then, not even the principals are in every day. So
Hey,
we have this big office.
Jeremiah and I share an office.
Yeah.
It's all good.
So anyway, we said, look, we're just going to start. Principals can share offices too. It's a rare
You
day.
can't talk to the wall, so. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so, we've got this hot desk thing going. And anyway, so Matt, literally, this office was set up for him like 3 months ago. And just today, he just moved it. So he's listening to the conversation. Of course, I told him, I suggested to Rens he should have.
Well, it's a good time to. We're going through the growth in all the market sectors. I do want to talk about sustainability and passive house and future buildings, but I think it's no better time than with Matt's introduction to talk about the lessons learned and the frustration or the challenges with the ownership transition, and you put some practices in place pretty early on so that you could prepare for the future growth of the company.
Yes.
Could you share some of that?
So I would say that 2008 period is probably one of the most stressful times. And when you start going through this, and there is a worry that the firm owes money, and the lawyers come in, the attorneys come in, the shifts, right, and all these professionals show up, and
they all want to be paid too. I don't know.
They do want to be paid. But we wrote these, retirement agreements, severance agreements, whatever you want to call them. We moved on very quickly. And I said at that time, I don't want anyone else to have to go through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I was becoming a majority shareholder, and I felt like it was just so much to be doing. And I never wanted, any kind of animosity, or I wanted it to be known what was going to happen. So within a couple of years, we had a new accountant, same attorney. We rewrote the shareholder documents. And I said, the year you turn 62, you have to start selling shares. We've kind of done it in a number of different ways, but everyone has started selling at 62. And the point of that is, it's not to dictate how long you can work. The point is, you're going to stick around for a 5-year buyout, and you're going to help the next generation be successful, right?
That's the name of the game.
In terms of transitioning clients, in terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of helping, as I said, we're sort of rebranding the brand yet again. What is that going to be? And so, I was very lucky to have a handful of project managers who have been around here for 20, 25 years, a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were born here. Right, Matt? Were you born here?
It says a lot about the firm, for sure.
And so it was pretty obvious who was going to step up.
Mm-hmm.
And so now
you want that internally too. I think for anybody that's an aspiring next generation leader of a firm, you want to be recognized amongst your peers that you're capable and deserving of an opportunity.
Right. So we've been talking about this for the past 4 or 5 years, and slow transition, having quarterly meetings. Architects don't get trained in what a business is. Talking through, here's what the shareholder documents mean. Here's the responsibilities you're taking on. A kind of a slow transition. As of the first of this year, Matt's our new Chief Operating Officer, and our controller is our Chief Financial Officer with expanded responsibilities about the firm. We'll probably make some more changes going forward. We are working hard so that the generation post them understands who we think they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they are moving into positions as, lieutenants, whatever you want to call them. But each of these new owners now has been developing their practice, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to fill in for each of them. And as we've said in our annual retreat the past couple of years, there's tremendous opportunity, right? We've written a way to hand the baton. We've we've done it before. We're doing it again.
Yeah.
It's known. It's predictable,
Most
and
important part.
yeah,
Predictable, sustainable, transferable, and as you mentioned, putting the next level of leadership in a position to succeed.
yeah,
A small piece of advice that I give to any new business owner or shareholder is you have to separate, especially when you have partners, several partners. You have to separate your worth as an operating executive or principal versus your value as a shareholder. Those are
yeah.
two separate things. So you have to think about, what am I contributing on a
Right,
day-to-day and performance level as an operating person in this company, and then
right,
you get your percentage of a distribution as a shareholder. I
right.
think the demise of a company is when a lot of people aren't trained in business, because none of us are. We're trained in our profession. And you can get, if you get congestion up at the ownership, but they don't understand that, people just think you get to take all the profit at a shareholder and not actually do anything. Or you get an inflated sense of value in your day to day function because of that shareholder title. And I think that's toxic in an environment, in a company.
Yeah, I think that's why we've done this 4-year transition thing so that everybody, and I think they've all been surprised. Like, okay, you now own some percentage of the company, and guess what? When we're doing profit sharing at the end of the year, you your share of ownership matters in how we divide that up, right? And I
Absolutely.
think, have you been pleasantly surprised, Matt? Yeah.
Pleasantly surprised. Could you
Um,
share? You mentioned your brother, your father, CPA, accountant, and part of you that still loves the number. But like you said, you kind of grew as an architect and then into the shareholder abrupt ownership transition. Now you're leading a business. What type of things did you have to learn to become the business leader? Because you're obviously running a very successful business, which we'll get to in a second. But like, what type of things did you have to kind of let go of as a performing architect so that you could become the leader of a business?
well, my children would answer that one way.
All your personal time, yeah.
As I recall, at ages, 29 and 31, you were never home for dinner.
Yes.
Um, so,
There's the resilience trait you mentioned earlier.
I've been really lucky. As I said, I hired great project managers. So I feel like I got to stay involved with the work. I love that early phase. I love helping to conceive what the projects can be. I love being, building relationships with the clients that we have. And I like talking with the public and getting things permitted. So I think because I had a strong next generation, I got to stay involved with a lot. And then I had a very creative controller in Judy Jorgensen, who had an art degree and a finance degree from Duke, right? And Judy knew how to look at the world in very unique ways. And she was constantly pushing and saying, we should do this, or what do you think about that? And we didn't do all of that. Certainly.
Dog started barking.
Um, we, so I think that every year we would start the year by saying, okay, what are the 3 to 5 things we need to do? Let's commit to doing them. Let's figure out how to get them done. And that just became sort of the mantra, right? Start the year fresh,
Get focused on the things that matter.
right?
Don't get distracted by everything else.
Right.
Yeah,
And so
it's really important.
I would say that Judy and I had a tremendous partnership. And there is no way we would be where we are had she not been here and have been as creative as she was, even though she had this, the CFO. And crazy, she go for heart valve surgery. This is probably now 10 10 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. I don't remember. And she took the time to reach out to our accountant and find somebody who could come in and cover for her.
Oh, man.
And that person is Janice Marinello, who is our CFO now, who has, that relationship continued. The two of them worked together for a while.
An amazing person.
Yeah, another amazing person.
Cares
deeply.
about you and the company above herself, it seems.
Yeah.
So architect, learned business, became a great leader. Something even in the intro of this, like I am obsessed with high-powered organizations. And something I always look at, or my key metric, I like to make things simple. I do all my planning and I have all my financial KPIs, but the one that I constantly refer to and think on a daily basis is revenue per FTE, or full-time employee equivalent.
Had this conversation.
We had this conversation and I wanted to share it with everyone else. So 2022 Boston Real Estate Times, they post the largest architecture firms in Boston. Icon, Nancy's firm, made that list. I think it was number 15. I'm not totally worried about the order in which the list is up there, because it's based on revenue, but I do look at the revenue versus the employees and the revenue per FTE. And it's an estimate, because we don't know if that's actual employees. Like if you only have somebody part-time or people for half the year, they don't quite count as an FTE. So like the numbers aren't perfect off of there, but regardless of how you look at the numbers, it's clear that you're running a high-powered organization. So a very healthy company. Could you talk to us about some of those keys to running such a healthy organization?
Sure. And I want to say we're not a sweatshop. I hope.
Well, if you were, you wouldn't have project managers for 25 years like you do. So, and I think that's a really important distinction, because sometimes people think the only way to be successful is to convince people to do a lot of work for you for not a lot of money. And if you can get them working extra, then you make more money as a business owner. But that's creating a ton of culture debt and no brand that any leader really wants.
I think that we have given people a long leash, right? And if you give people opportunity and they see a way to advance their career, to have an effect on the way things get done and how they get done. I think this is profound right now. I want to say, like 15 years ago when I took over, you have these junior people in the office and they're doing amazing things. But then you have these senior people in the office and they want the titles. And we got rid of all the titles and we created what we call the leadership committee. And so some of these younger employees who excelled in certain aspects of doing things, we found a way to give them an expertise that they could participate in the leadership committee. And so a young guy who was introducing all the, the programs and rendering stuff and just doing amazing design work, right? We brought him onto the leadership committee and we called him like the BIM guru. I don't know. I of course always wanted to make up crazy names for these people. I wanted to call the design review team, give them a title called Dirt. But my Janice Mamayak thought that was not good. Anyway, we did elevate some people who did not have tenure with the firm necessarily, but were adding tremendous value. So we elevated them and gave them license, right, to think creatively about the firm doing things in a different or better way. And
that's fulfilling. Right?
We also at that time started doing a ton of training. We called it Icon University, and
we call it H&O University.
Right. And you figure out, okay, what do people need to learn about? How can we just recently organized a 12-month calendar. And because we realized, okay, people come into the firm and they're not always hearing the same lessons. And so we've just organized a 12-month calendar about what's the January lesson,
Yes.
what's the February lesson, right? And so what are these topics that we continue to feel like we have to update and inform staff of it? So every month there's one of those topics that goes forward. During COVID, tough stuff, right?
Not easy.
Staff. I remember coming into this office. We have 11,000 square feet. I'd be the only person. And I'm like,
You were very safe as the only person in 11,000 square feet.
I mean, we pay a ton of rent. And I wanted to make sure, like, the roof wasn't leaking.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think that working our way through COVID has also empowered people. You don't need to come into the firm every day.
Right.
What's really funny is pre-COVID, I remember saying to the junior shareholders, right? You guys, I think this, I talked to some of our junior staff who were driving an hour and a half to get into the city each day.
It's a long commute.
Sitting at their desktop, and nobody's talking to them because they don't have a meeting that day or whatever.
Yeah.
And I did propose back, in 2018 or 19, I think we need to go, like, people only need to come in 3 days a week. And they were aghast. No, terrible idea. We'll never do that. And now, of course,
That's the expectation almost, right?
But when you accept, you're not going to see people every day, right? You have to have trust and faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
We certainly organized some repetitive Zoom groups that met on a daily basis to monitor what was going on. But
that's great.
We've entrusted people with authority, right?
It's amazing what happens when you trust people.
That's what happens, right?
I really think trust is something that should be given, not earned.
Absolutely.
You have to keep it, right? Trust can be lost, but trust should. Things move faster when you lead with trust.
Yeah. And we do a lot of group things around here too. Now we're doing the live person again, and there's always a segment of your workforce who really doesn't care about that stuff. But there are,
and that's
people,
okay.
Yeah, and they don't have to, right? It's your choice. But there are people who do really care. Some really deep conversations around this office.
Yeah.
Again, a younger woman who was just terrific, who said, we want you to be our DEI leader.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been organizing these
empowering people,
books and movies and, really powerful conversations. So.
Yeah, so the takeaways there on leading a high-powered organization, one is giving people opportunity, right? Not making barriers of tenure to any type of opportunity. If somebody has a skill, make sure you give them a platform to leverage that skill.
Absolutely.
You had
very good at summarizing.
I'm trying. Lead with trust. Trust should be given.
Big
right?
One. Big one. Yeah.
All good. So as we wrap up today, because I think we could keep going, but we got to wrap up. So if you could share, what's the 5-year vision look like for Icon? Where's Icon going over the next 5 years?
New leadership.
New leadership.
New leadership, as I've said repeatedly over the past few years, the firm will not be the firm that it was under my leadership. The firm will be your firm, right? Mm-hmm. We're still going to do lots of different kinds of projects. We're still going to, I'm sure, have a focus on housing. But the way you do it and the types of clients and relationships that you bring to it will be yours, will be yours to own. And so over the next 5 years, I mean, we have planned, it's in place. We've got the next generation moving in. I say to Matt, like, okay, I'm still coming in, and okay, I'm still bringing in work. And one day I'm going to show up, and you're going to say, I am so done with you. Just get out of here.
Get out of the way. This office is feeling crowded all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Well, I think it took me 3 months to move in here.
Anyway, and the next 5 years will be really important for Icon 4.0.
Yeah.
Right.
So excited. Top book or podcast you might recommend with us?
Matt Desmond,
the author's
name, and he's just come out with a new book that I haven't yet read. It's on my list. which is called Poverty and Profit in the American City.
All right. 2 books. We'll have to check them out. And to close out today, could you share some advice for the emerging leaders out there?
Take some risk.
Take some risk.
Take some risk, right?
Jump
Put
right in.
yourself out there. Take some risk.
It's necessary.
Step into it, right?
Not taking action is also a risk, so you might as well take a risk to see where you get.
Take a risk. Try something.
Nancy,
Forward.
thank you so much for your time today. I always enjoy our conversations. I admire what you have built at Icon and the systems you've put in place, the thought you've put into the next level of leadership and emerging leaders. So I applaud you for all of that. And thanks for joining us on Design
Thanks for
Development.
doing this.
My pleasure. Hi, everyone. Real quick before you leave for the day, if we could ask one favor. If you enjoyed today's conversation, if you're enjoying all the conversations on design development, please share this with someone that you think will benefit from it. Our goal is to help as many people in the design, development, and construction industries. And with your help, I think we can spread the word and help more people. Thanks for tuning in, and can't wait to hear from you next time.